So here's a little bit of a fun one. If you're ever playing chess and your opponent opens with the move pawn to e4 and you reply with pawn to e5, there is always a chance that your opponent will try to beat you as quickly as possible. And if they want to win in only 4 moves, the opponent is going to be playing queen to h5. And this is known as the wayward queen attack, the Parham attack, scholar's mate, Patzer opening, 4-move checkmate. It has a lot of names, but whatever you want to call it. This is at its core one of the simplest and most crude plans available to white. And the plan is obviously very simple. You play bishop to c4, you attack f7 twice, and then you play queen takes f7, delivering a checkmate. And this is how a lot of beginners lose the game as early as possible. And it's very popular. You might think it's just for kids. It's like scholastic chess. You can win a lot of games. Maybe it's just like super beginner tournaments. You would never see somebody very good playing this, but you would be completely wrong, because if you flip over to the Masters database, you will see this has been played as white by Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen again. Hikaru Nakamura 5 or 6 times. You'll see Nakamura playing this. This has actually been played by a lot of very decent players in very reasonable tournaments. So it's something you got to be ready for no matter what rating level you're at. And you also might want to be a little bit shocked. Here's another little factoid. The average rating player of somebody that actually plays queen to h5 is about 1800. So it's a lot stronger than you might think. And you got to be ready for it. You got to have something. But in this video, I'm not just going to give you the standard textbook antidote against the 4-move checkmate. I'm going to be showing you something that is a completely pointless refutation. That is, this might not be objectively the absolute best way to play with black, but it is something that is very dangerous and ultimately very rare, and a lot of opponents might mess up if you're able to get this. Now, here's how we get there. We need to play a couple of standard moves before we can get to our starting position. Now, let's also take note that this queen on e5, while adding the first attacker against our f7 pawn, it's also attacking the e5 pawn. So the standard move here is knight to c6. You want to be able to develop your pieces. You want to be able to protect your e-pawn. But now, white plays bishop to c4, and again, all we got to do every single time in every single position, whenever you play an e4, e5 opening, you always count how many times is f7 attacked. And here it's attacked twice and only defended once by our king. So we need to get this queen to move away. So we will be playing this move, pawn to g6. And now, the queen will need to move. We have protected our f7 pawn for now. This pawn is fully protected, so the queen will drop back to f3. And this is something that will always reliably happen. Whenever somebody's trying to scholars mate you, they're going to try again. Like, you stopped it once, but you know what? They try again, and sometimes there's persistency is rewarded, and sometimes players with the black pieces do tend to mess up on this move here. But now, this is where I'm going to be sharing with you something particularly interesting, because the standard textbook reply is to play the very natural move knight to f6, and this is not what we're going to be talking about here today. But if you want to know how to just get a very reasonable position against the scholar's mate, you play knight to f6, and this way the knight shields your pawn, knight is protected by the queen, and you're going to get a very good position. And it's worth pointing out that you are threatening knight to d4. This would be a particularly strong move, highlighting kind of how bad this square is on f3. We're threatening to just attack the queen, and then failing that, if white somehow defends against it, we'll be playing d6, we'll be just developing our pieces, and we're going to get castled. All of the pieces will come out to very reasonable squares, and you'll get a good position. So that is all very well and good, but it turns out that there is another very rare move, and I got the database here so you can see all the different ways that black has ever attempted to defend this f7 pawn in this square. So knight f6, obviously the most popular choice, but maybe you can use the queen, you can go here or here. Maybe you can play f6, which looks like a little bit weird. Maybe you can play knight to d4. This is very popular, getting checkmated immediately. But there's also, way at the bottom, this move, pawn to f5, which is only played in 0.6% of all of the games, but if you look at this win rate, it's scoring 54% with an average rating of 1846 for the black pieces. And the thing that maybe is the most surprising, this variation actually has a name. This is the Frederiksberg Variation of the Parham attack, and maybe it's named after Freddy the f-pawn, but by moving your f-pawn, you're one, enticing white to just simply take, which is a major mistake that 75% of all players will be making. And this is how you might be able to get a very good position, because if they take, this is very bad for white. And if they don't take, and they play something like knight to e2, taking into account the fact that maybe we are threatening something like knight to d4, this would be the best way for white to continue. We still are going to end up with a very good position, because at the end of the day, you should never have your queen on f3. It just doesn't really make makes sense, and f5 is a very unusual, interesting way of trying to punish it. But first, before we show you the Stockfish move, which is knight to e2, let's begin by taking a look at what is most likely to occur, and this is what you're actually going to get in most of your games. People are going to be taking on f5, which is a horrible mistake due to this very strong move, knight to d4, and just pay attention to how well this actually scores for black. And here, white needs to make a major choice, because knight to d4 is so strong, not only because it attacks this queen, which is going to gain some tempo, but also because we are attacking this c2 pawn and we're threatening this major fork. So you will see that most players will be playing queen to d5. Obviously, white is always trying to checkmate us, but if you pop this onto an engine, you will see that the best move is to play queen to d1. Here's what the engine, but it's already minus 1.2, so already we have a very large advantage with black. So let's take a look at both of these moves. Now, the best move for white is to play queen to d1, but here you can just get a very strong position with black. You're going to be playing pawn to d5. You're going to be attacking the bishop. We've established a very strong center. The d pawn is protected by our queen, so when the bishop backs up, now we can just grab this guy back, and we sacrificed a pawn, but it was only temporary. We get the pawn back, and now we have a very strong position. We actually have more development. We've brought more of our pieces out. We got the huge center, and we're just going to continue. Maybe queen d7 and get castled on the queen side would be a very strong way of continuing. Might also be possible to just simply try to develop on the king side and get castled over there if that's what you prefer. But however you want to do it, this is just already very, very comfortable for black. So instead of that, what most players will tend to do if you do get to this position, and you can see how popular it is in the database, this is 37.4% of the games, most players are going to be playing queen to d5, and this is really in the spirit of the opening. If you're white and you're playing this, you're just going to keep trying to make a threat on f7 every single turn. That's all you got on your mind. You got the one simple caveman idea. So as black, all we need to be able to do is defend f7, but also take care of our e-pawn. And the best way of doing this is with this move, queen to e7. And at first, this might look like it's a little bit uncomfortable for black because we are putting a queen in front of our bishop, but we're not terribly worried about it because we're actually about to get a huge advantage here with the black pieces. And the bishop always has another comfortable way of developing if we ultimately need it. But now, we have stopped your major threat by white. You can't play queen to f7. We've also defended this pawn. So now we need to take a look around, and suddenly we see it's actually black that has a threat in this position. We are trying to take on c2, so white needs to be really careful and pay attention. So what are you going to do if you were white? Well, probably you would play knight to a3. The knight comes back and defends the c2 pawn. This would be a very reasonable way of continuing. And now you have a couple different plans available to you as black. Knight f6 is the most popular, or I guess actually equally likely, is c6 intending pawn to d5. And these are both very good plans that black could continue, whether you want to just get the massive center right away, or if you want to develop with tempo, which I think actually makes it very difficult for white to continue from here. So knight to f6 now attacks the queen, and suddenly we see this knight is defending this square. The knight on d4 is defending the f3 square, so the queen doesn't have an easy way of retreating. You also can't go here. You can't go here because of this knight. So the only square that's available to the queen is to go all the way to a5. And now we simply gain a bunch of time by attacking this queen as much as possible. We want to play pawn to b6, attack the queen again, make her run away somewhere. And now we can play either d5, which is very popular, or bishop to b7. Why not just continue to develop by attacking these pawns? And if the knight ever comes out, you know we're going to be able to shatter it. Notice how we're defending this, so something like this would give us a very fantastic position. We get castled queenside, we play pawn to d4. We're just loving life. So instead, what white is typically going to be doing is something like pawn to f3, but obviously this can't be great either. We're going to get castled, we're going to play d5, and if you ask a computer, this is not only just like winning for black, this is just like totally over. We're going to get castled, maybe we can win this pawn back, we could even play a6, whatever we decide to do. We're just going to have a fantastically winning position by black. We're going to have massive center control, we're way ahead in development, and none of the white pieces really make any sense. So this is something fantastic that might be able to score you a lot of points. But what if the opponent plays just a little bit better in this position, and after pawn to f5, they don't get greedy, they don't decide to just take this thing right away, and they instead play more like the computer? Well, the best way for white to continue is with knight to e2, and this controls the d4 square. We saw in the previous lines that this is a massive threat. Knight to d4 is a huge threat by black, attacking the queen, but also attacking the c pawn. And knight e2 does the best job of defending it. And here I will point out that there are possibly a lot of different ways to continue with black. For example, after knight to f6, which would be the most logical developing move, I should again point your attention that it will not really ever be possible for white to take this pawn. We're always going to be getting a massive advantage by being able to play pawn to d5, establishing this huge center, and then even in one of these positions, wherever the bishop decides to move, we're always going to be able to be in time to get our pawn back, and we should be really happy with the position that we've gotten. So what white really needs to focus on is the same thing that we're focused on, which is the same thing you should be focused on every single game, which is developing your pieces and getting castled. And the best move for white here is to develop this knight, keep more protection of this pawn, and then ultimately just try to get your stuff out and get castled. So if white follows these kinds of rules, I will point out that there's a lot of different ways that, again, here you can play with black. Computer has a tendency to want to play knight to a5 and go after this bishop, which seems very reasonable. But if you just play pawn to d6, there is another very dangerous plan in this line that you can play with black that might actually trap a lot of players with the white pieces. And it occurs after d3. Again, white should just be focused on bolstering the center, being able to develop all of the pieces. But now here, it is obviously very possible. You can still play bishop to g7. You can still go after this bishop. You can do any of that. But you have this very sneaky move, pawn to f5 in this position. And I think a move like this might trick a lot of players because it looks like, you know what, we're just cutting out this bishop. We have to be a little bit more sensitive to the fact that white might have a little bit of an easier time playing pawn to d4, but we've actually crafted a very sneaky threat here with black. And our plan is to play bishop to g4 and trap the queen. So white needs to be very careful, because if you're not cautious, we go here, and the queen has run out of squares to go to, the bishop is defended, and the queen gets trapped. So what most players will do, sensing that this is coming, is they will play pawn to h3. This seems like a very sensible way for white to just get rid of this threat, and everything seems like, okay, the threat is gone, nothing to see here, time to just move on with our life. And black very well could. You could just start developing this guy, you could try to get these guys out, you could go after this bishop again, a lot of different things you could do. But maybe the most aggressive and most dangerous weapon you have available to you as black is to play this move, pawn to g5. And this makes another threat. And now this time the threat is just to play pawn to g4. And white really needs to be able to deal with this, because if you don't do anything, pawn to g4 is just going to trap the queen. If you take this back with the pawn, no big deal. We take with the bishop, all of these squares are covered, and suddenly the queen is trapped. So people need to come up with something yet again, and it's not really easy. The queen is very boxed in on the f3 square. So what has happened, and this has only happened once, or at least in this position, it's actually happened about 4 times. And what's interesting is that white scores very well here. After pawn to g4, it seems like it's white that is scoring really well, even after h5. But if you ask a computer, it's like it's between -1 and -2. Like, this is a very strong continuation for black. And so it's kind of interesting that in practice, white seems to be doing really well here. But I think if you get this position, you should be feeling very comfortable. For example, the line is here, and now strange, funny computer moves, obviously. Normal developing moves are going after this bishop is also fine, but some funny computer moves going after this pawn might also lead you to a very good position. The computer line is like this, and then swinging the queen over. Anyways, get your stuff out, get castled, and no matter what, even if your opponent doesn't fall for the tricks, look at this. You get an excellent position. So that's the Frederiksberg Variation. What do you guys think of it? Pawn to f5. Would you ever give this a go? Play the Frederiksberg Variation. And if you like that, please make sure you subscribe. Okay, bye.